This week, it was revealed LA prosecutors charged the driver of a Tesla with 2 counts of vehicular manslaughter after running a red light and crashing into another car in 2019, killing 2 people. At the time, the vehicle was on autopilot, making this the first felony case in the U.S. involving a car using an automated driving system. Joining us now to break down the legal aspects of this case is Rachel Fiset. She's a criminal defense attorney and co-founder of the legal firm Zweibach, Fiset and Coleman LLP. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
So, as the law currently stands, how much responsibility do drivers in self-automated cars have when on the road, or in a case where a glitch in the software leads to a crash with potentially deadly circumstances?
Well, that's the interesting part about this case is it's the first one in a widely used autopilot situation. So at this moment, drivers in an autopilot situation have just as much responsibility to act like a reasonable driver as anybody else. Now, what will come forward through this case is what is reasonable driving, what is negligent driving as it relates to a car when it has autopilot on. This will be a precedent-setting case, and it will definitely be one to watch.
A lot of this self-driving technology is new, and the kinks are still being worked out. But as that technology develops, could we see the liability shift more towards automakers in the future?
Well, the automakers won't have the criminal liability that the driver could have. So what's interesting, particularly about this case, is that it's a criminal felony charge against the driver. Now, of course, the driver is going to turn around and say, I cannot be responsible for a felony when I was relying on the car and what the car was going to do. That was reasonable driving he will say, in my shoes. Now, at the same time, that same driver or the victims of the crash may turn around and look to Tesla as it relates to the product itself and for the product malfunction that may have led to this crash.
It's so interesting. And we've seen videos of Tesla drivers taking a nap behind the steering wheel on highways while using that self-driving feature. And up until the last month, Tesla drivers were even able to play those video games on the touchscreen while the vehicles were in motion. Can the defendant make a convincing argument that Tesla isn't a company that prioritizes safety?
Well, I think the driver will say, I really relied on Tesla's representations that the driving would be done by the car. And what I think the DA will say is absolutely no way. When you hop into a vehicle, you are still the driver of the vehicle and you have to abide by the rules of the road. So this is very interesting. I think that there are more protections being put into place in these automated vehicles to make sure that users are still aware and still behind the wheel, paying attention, not napping, not screaming at their kids, not playing video games, and still driving when they're in the car. And that is what is reasonable as a driver on the road. So yeah, this will be interesting. That will be the defendant's defense. And it will be up to potentially up to a jury to decide what is reasonable when your car is on autopilot.
Tesla, as well as other companies using self-driving technology, have modes that allow their cars to come when called or park on their own without anyone having to even be inside. So are car owners accountable for what their vehicle does when they're not behind the wheel?
Still to be seen. We don't know yet. So I would guess from a prosecutor's perspective, from a lawmaker's perspective, they want someone always responsible for what the car does. And my guess is that is how the law will shake out, that if you choose to have a self-driving car, if you choose to use autopilot, that you as the driver are still responsible for the actions of that vehicle, because it is too much on an individual level in each city and where the lawmakers are present as it relates to individual accidents to kick that up. Somebody has to still be responsible for each vehicle. And I think as this law progresses, and it is going to progress side by side with technology, it will try to be shown that each individual is still responsible for their own vehicle.
As you mentioned, this case will be setting a precedent. Criminal defense attorney Rachel Fiset, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me.